What's up, guys? Mystic Mac here again. Today we're just going to talk about some GPP lineup construction strategies, kind of get an idea of where I'm looking to go this week, just kind of get a final look before the games kind of get a kickoff tomorrow afternoon. So before I do that, I did just kind of want to mention I do have a Patreon account where I have exclusive NBA and XFL content going right now. I do have NFL and MLB. But since those aren't in right now, specifically for XFL, I do like a game-by-game breakdown article. I have some data sets that I'm going to end up having as soon as we get some data going. As you can see, this is kind of the what the kind of article looks like. I just go in-depth, game-by-game, get a good breakdown of each team. This is a 7-page article. This is probably going to be the shortest article that I have all season just because this is the least amount of information. In addition to that, I'm going to have a bunch of player dashboards with a bunch of player information. This is the NFL ones, and then the team dashboard or a team dashboard head-to-head sheet where we can see some of that information. Obviously, we won't have all of the same data. A lot of the same metrics aren't going to be in there for the XFL, but for the data that we will have, it'll be pumped in there for all of the Patreons. And if that's not something you're interested in, I totally understand. No worries. I'm going to be pumping out some free content here constantly throughout the course of the season for XFL. So if that's something you're interested in, just hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. That would be greatly appreciated. But let's dive into this. I guess before I should mention, with Patreon is just patreon.com, Patreon/Mystic Mac DFS, MYSTIC MAC DFS. Appreciate you. All right, let's get into it, guys. I'm excited for this. I've already registered all of my contests for this week. I have a little over $400 in play for this week. I am super excited about it, guys. I'm going a little heavier than maybe I should for the opening week, but I have a pretty strong feeling for this week. Guys, I've done a lot of work the last couple of weeks, just getting everything ready. Some of the depth charts were just released last night. Some injury concerns, and I think that a lot of people are going to be looking the wrong way, and I think that we're going to be able to get a big edge here. Something that's a little bit different for me is that during NFL the past couple seasons, I've really lowered my cash game exposures for NFL. I was mainly a cash game player years ago, 5-6 years ago, when I was first really diving deep into DFS. There was a much bigger edge, and I've kind of felt that the edge has gotten less and less, and that is because of all the information that is out there. Everybody is producing NFL content, right? So that edge of the good plays, it's just becoming a lot more thin, and it's your risk is just becoming. You're not allowed a lot of risk is what I'm allowed to, or excuse me, is what I'm trying to say. Your risk is just so small. Like if you make one mistake, you're kind of toast, and that's just not the case transitioning into the XFL, where there's going to be a large edge. I imagine you play a lot of your head-to-heads in your 50-50s. There's going to be a lot of people that aren't going to have the same players as you, whereas generally 5-6 players in your cash games and your head-to-heads are going to, in NFL, would be the same players, and then you would have to pick and choose 1 to 2, 3 additional other players, right? And you kind of had to hit those. That's what I mean by your risk. And that's just not going to be the same here. I think a lot of players are going to be playing guys because they know their name, or because they're high-priced, or because they're just familiar with them. And I think that's wrong. I think that's going to give us a big edge. So I'm playing about 50% into cash games and a 50% into GPPs. And I'm pretty stoked to do that. What we're going to focus on here, though, we're going to focus on GPPs. And we're going to focus on some lineup construction strategies and kind of what I'm kind of leaning on doing this week. So how I like to begin my lineups in GPPs, I like to pick it by getting my favorite stack. Right, and so generally what we knew for NFL, you would get the quarterback, get 1 to 2 of his receivers, and then bring it back with one of the opponent's receivers. And where I do think that is still very viable, I am not nearly as concerned with bringing it back with an opponent's wide receiver. I believe that there's going to be tons of other wide receiver plays, specifically a lot cheaper plays early on in the year that are going to outperform the opponent's wide receivers, where I don't think that's going to be a necessity. I could be wrong, and we're going to find this out as the course of the season goes. But that's kind of how I'm leaning. I obviously will, but I think there will be some games where you're not going to have any interest in any of the receivers on that side. So that's kind of an idea that I'm kind of thinking. So for me, a couple of my favorite options this week, passing offenses, is I like Cardale Jones a good amount. And I guess before we kind of dive into that, I just want to mention something that's kind of important. Obviously, Josh Johnson, highest priced quarterback on the slate, probably the most popular quarterback on the slate, very arguably one of the best quarterbacks on the slate. He is, in fact, the oldest player or quarterback on the slate. And he is questionable. He's looking doubtful at the moment. That is something to keep in mind. His backup, Chad Knopf, I think his name is, he's played at Princeton University. He's not a guy that we're going to have very much interest in. And that's going to be a big knock for Los Angeles, guys. That's going to make, I think, Houston Roughnecks defense, which we'll get into later, viable. That's going to be a big knock to the receiving units. That's going to be just a big knock to them. That's a big downgrade from Josh Johnson to Knopf. And then the next one, Landry Jones. He is questionable. I'm a little bit more optimistic on him, specifically because I listened to some interviews and watched some interviews with him and Coach Bob Stoops, and they were optimistic about Landry Jones playing this week. It is the last game on the slate, so for me, he isn't going to be cash game viable because it's just too risky, but I do think he makes for a strong GPP play. And he very easily could be the best quarterback in the entire league, and that wouldn't surprise me one bit. And we'll kind of get to that in a second, but I did just want to mention those injury concerns and kind of what they would do if they did pop up. So Cardale Jones, like I mentioned, he's probably my favorite overall quarterback on the slate. Raw points goes, he is my favorite quarterback on the slate. He is 1 or 2 as my favorite quarterback overall with salary included. We'll talk about the next guy. He is 10.2K, so he's the second highest quarterback on the slate. If Josh Johnson is out, he will be the highest owned quarterback on the slate. Sorry about that. Looks like someone is doing some weeding in the backyard. All right. So, what we like about Cardale Jones, you guys know him from Ohio State. He's a national champion over there. We know that they have they're heavy favorites into this game. Pep Hamilton and him have had a nice little relationship they've been building off the field. They've been going to do workouts together, not just throwing workouts with some of the receivers, doing workout drills. They've been doing weightlifting. They've been eating dinner together. They've been really getting to know each other. I'm really excited for this team. So I really like going with the Cardale Jones, bringing it back. Let's see, wide receivers here. So most people are going to see Rashad Ross. He's one of the more popular guys on the slate. He is the highest priced wide receiver on the slate by a good margin. Price isn't a real big factor, so you can easily afford him. That isn't an issue whatsoever. However, according to the depth charts, he is lower on the depth charts. He has actually, rumors have been speculating that he has been practicing with the second team. And so this, guys, is where I believe we're going to get a big edge, right? If a lot of people are going to be focusing on Rashad Ross, who I think is still a fine play. He has game-breaking speed. That's undeniable. He could easily catch 2 to 3 touchdowns, get past the secondary. This is going to be a pass-heavy league. Cardale Jones is probably going to pass 55 to 60 times a game. And if that's the case, it's very plausible to see Rashad Ross burn them. But I do think since he is the highest-priced guy, he will likely be one of the highest owned wide receivers, specifically when you go to look to pair with Cardale Jones. But a guy that I like and one of my favorite plays on the entire slate, Malachi Dupree. I think that he's going to be a sneaky guy. He's going to be the number 1 wide receiver because I need to mention again here, DeAndre Tompkins. He is listed out. He was the number 1 wide receiver on the depth chart. That moves Malachi Dupree up. Rashad Ross should get the number 2 spot, and then Eli Rogers, who I like a good amount, will run from the slot. You guys, a lot of you probably know him from the time in Pittsburgh, and I think he's a very, very solid slot runner. So we like Cardale, and I like this DC team specifically because he has a really strong wide receiver unit and a strong team in general. So I think you could go Rashad Ross, you could go Eli Rogers here. Honestly, either one. I'm going to have sprinkles of both. I do prefer Malachi Dupree over them because of ownership and because of his price tag. But for this, I'll just put in Eli Rogers for now. Like I said, I really like them both relatively equally in that spot. Eli Rogers probably go a little low round from there. So as far as that, we can look into Seattle. Seattle, I know they do have one guy that I am interested in, Keenan Reynolds. So guys, he is a former Navy quarterback. He actually broke the record. I believe he still holds the NCAA records for the most touchdowns. I think 88 touchdowns in his career there, total touchdowns, and he also had 4,500 total rush yards for a quarterback, which broke the NCAA record as well. So this guy is an athlete, clearly, right? He played a 4-year starter at Navy, transitioned, played a little time at running back, and now he's a wide receiver here in the XFL. Played some time with the Seattle Seahawks as a wide receiver, and people talked about he was very talented, such a hard worker. I remember Doug Baldwin praised him tons of time. And in a league where we have that forward pass rule, I think that Keenan Reynolds is going to be very interesting. I think that if we're able to get multiple pass chunk plays with Keenan Reynolds throwing the ball deep, potentially getting a touchdown, in a game that they're likely going to be trailing, I'm going to have a lot of interest in that. So like I said, I'm not going to always look to get an opponent's wide receiver, but if it fits and I like the guy like I do here, I'm going to plug him in. So at this point, we have a running back spot left, we have a flex spot left, and we have a defense. First thing I'm going to note, as far as the defense goes, guys, as you know, in the NFL, it was the highest variance position that there is. It's dependent on pick sixes and defensive touchdowns, which is unpredictable, right? You can kind of sense that you need quarterbacks who maybe throw interceptions, right? So maybe you can think, well, quarterbacks likely throw interceptions when they are pressured. So then maybe you could target defenses that have a high adjusted sack rate and get after the quarterback. And I think that's all fine, but at the end of the day, you need pick sixes to take down tournaments. You need defensive touchdowns to take down tournaments, and specifically so in the XFL. I believe it's going to be even more random. We're going to have a lot of quarterbacks that, yeah, they might be good for this, but they're not good quarterbacks in the scheme of like NFL talent, right? So if you told me Cardell Jones threw a pick six, I would not be surprised whatsoever, right? So I think it's going to be key if you're playing a lot of tournaments to get exposure to a lot of these defenses. Even if you like Cardell Jones, don't be afraid in a different lineup if you're playing a different quarterback to put in Seattle, and maybe even if you're playing in a super large field tournament to try to get 100K, maybe even look to play a defense against one of your quarterbacks, right? Like, these are things I think you're going to look on, but get exposure to a lot of defenses. I think it would be wrong to lock in just one defense. Yeah, you could get lucky, but you could also just absolutely kill your chances of winning 100K. So with that in mind, I'm just going to plug in a random cheap defense. I do think the Roughnecks, if Josh Johnson is out, would be one of the better defenses of the slate, especially if we're talking about a value perspective at 3.2K. So we'll just plug in him there. So we have 8.2. Like I said, guys, we have so much. Like, we just look at our flex here. We have so much room to just do about anything that we really want. I'm going to look at running back, and something that I think is going to be a little different than NFL. In NFL, we generally wanted 2 workhorse running backs, and then you wanted a running back in flex. I don't believe that's going to be the case, right? We only have 8 total teams. I think it's going to be very rare to have 3 or 4 running backs that are volume backs who will get 20 to 25 carries a game. I don't see it. Not in this type of league where we're trying to pass heavy. I think there will be 1, maybe 2 running backs that are going to be workhorse running backs. And so with that in mind, my player pool is going to be extremely thin. I'm almost always going to have 1 running back and 4 wide receivers / tight end at flex. I mean, even tight end is going to be slim, but Nick Truesdell, Brandon Barnes, there's a couple of them, Saxton, there's a couple of guys that you can think about, but primarily I think just 1 running back is going to be the key. It's just hard for me to imagine these guys having the ceiling that some of these receivers do when they're passing the ball 55 to 60 times a game. I just can't see that. But as far as my favorite running back goes, it is Cameron Artis-Payne. Before I talk about him, it was hopefully going to be Kenneth Farrow. He is actually not listed as the starter, which is surprising. They listed Jaquan Gardner as the starter. I had him projected as the third stringer, so that was very interesting to me. He is the pass catching type running back, so he does have a ceiling in that aspect, and a pretty, I guess could say an elevated floor perhaps, but he is on the depth chart as the number one guy. I'm still having concerns. I don't believe he's going to be a workhorse running back. But what I liked about Kenneth Farrow is that offensive coordinator Mike Riley for the Seattle Dragons was actually the head coach for the San Antonio Commanders in the AAF last season, and he had Kenneth Farrow on his team. He actually had the other backup running back Trey Williams on his team as well, and they were a powerhouse running team. And when I say powerhouse, they weren't, I'm not going to say they were like super dominant, but they led the league in rush attempts. I believe that's going to carry over where they're going to try to be a run heavy team, and that is why I like Kenneth Farrow. He did have some NFL time with the Chargers for a little bit, and he is a guy that I think has a lot of potential. He is a guy that I'm going to take some GPP shots in, but as far as cash, I just can't do it now that he's not listed as the number one starter on the depth chart. And with the depth charts, we do have to take them with a little bit of a grain of salt at this point in time. But like I said, I think he's going to be a fine GPP play. But as we're talking just overall play, I have to go $400 less and go Cameron Artis-Payne. This guy, a lot of you guys know, I think he played 4 years for the Panthers. He was pretty decent. I think he averaged about 4.2 yards per carry. He then played at Auburn, where he averaged, I think, 5.6 yards per carry in his 2 seasons there. I think that he has a lot of potential, and I think within a week or two, we're going to see him be an $8,000 running back or more. I genuinely do. And I think that he's a very strong way to get leverage from Landry Jones, where a lot of people are going to play Landry Jones, and I like Landry Jones, and I will be playing some Landry Jones. But I think in the lineups that you don't play Landry Jones, playing someone like Cameron Artis-Payne is kind of nice. But I also think that there are a lot of different options, a lot of different routes that we could go. Christine Michael, he's going to be probably one of the more popular running backs on the slate. I think that's fine. I'm not a big fan of the St. Louis Battlehawks. Head coach Jonathan Hayes, he was the tight ends coach, for the Cincinnati Bengals under Marvin Lewis for just forever. I want to say 99 to 2018. I just don't. They took Christine Michael with the number one overall pick. Not the number one, sorry. I think it was the number 6 overall pick, but in the first round pick of the skill position draft. So it's very clear to me that their mindset is going to be focusing on running. So I do like that. I do think that is going to be solid. However, they did tap Matt Jones in the 7th round. So it is very clear to me that they are going to focus on running. However, I think it could still be a committee. I'm not positive that Christian Michael will get all of that workload. And with him being the highest priced running back, with him having the biggest name, with him likely being the highest owned guy, I just prefer some guys like Kenneth Farrow and Cameron Artis-Payne, even Elijah Hood and Jarrell Presley, even for DC United as well. Presley isn't the guy that I would specifically play in this lineup with Cardell Jones. However, I think he's a good leverage play, like we just spoke about with Cameron Artis-Payne and Landry Jones. So Elijah or Presley would be a good leverage play against Cardell Jones in different lineups if you wanted to go that route. I'm not going to fill out any other lineup here. Like I said, this isn't even for sure something I'm thinking of, a for sure lineup I'm at. These are just random ideas. I haven't built my lineups yet. I'm just kind of going through some ideas. Another guy that I like, I'm not sure if this guy's going to be popular. He's the cheapest quarterback out of all starters at $7.8K. And he's on a team that is going to be extremely, extremely pass heavy. And I think people know that this team's going to be pass heavy. I've heard a lot of people talk about Houston and June Jones and how June Jones's wide receivers caught 98% of his touchdowns in his last 4 years as a head coach in the CFL, and how his wide receivers too had a 24% target share in the last 4 seasons as head coach in the CFL. And so I know a lot of people were probably going to look for Connor Cook, but I would imagine still people would play PJ Walker, but I'm not sure. PJ Walker he's an all right quarterback. He's had a little bit of a very marginal amount of success. He had played for the Colts in preseasons. He had about a 55% completion percentage, 4 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. But that's not why I'm interested in him. I'm interested in him because he's the cheapest quarterback on the slate, and he's very potentially could throw the most pass attempts on the slate. June Jones is going to chuck the ball. This team doesn't employ a tight end. That tells me that they're going to focus on passing the football. So I'm going to have some interest in that, and not to mention, I love the wide receiver core here. I'm just such a big fan. Sammy Coates gonna very likely be one of the highest owned wide receivers, and for good reason. He's a speedster, he's a burner, he's a big play threat. And if you're throwing the ball 60 times a game, you're gonna want interest in these guys who can get past the secondary. They're gonna come down with one or two. But my favorite play here is Khalil Lewis. He's a guy that if you watched my previous video, he was the first guy I talked about when I went through the guys. 5 guys that you need to know before the season. He's going to be the the number 2 wide receiver behind Sammy Coates. We mentioned how June Jones targeted his wide receivers too at a 24% target share clip. That's very impressive. That's something I'm going to want interest in, especially when he's 4.1K. I think that he's one of my favorite wide receivers on the entire slate. Cash game staple for me. I think Sammy Coates, great play. Cam Phillips is going to even another good play. I prefer Khalil Lewis and Sammy Coates probably to Cam Phillips, but in GPPs, that's what makes Cam Phillips so interesting is we're going to want to target guys in this offense, specifically those wide receivers. So I'll have a lot of interest here. I'll put Sammy Coates in for that one. I'm just going to plug in another random defense. Should go with the Wildcats. No, we don't want the Wildcats. We're playing against them. Let's go Dragons. Essentially the cheapest. I don't like the Dragons, right, guys? I'm just letting you know I don't care about defense really in this situation. I can upgrade the defense later. We're going to have tons of salary. I'm just putting it in there so we can get a sense of the salary, even though really salary is unlimited. All right, so next, let's go. I'm going to go with Jarrell Presley. Like I said, I think that he is very solid leverage off of Cardell Jones. I like when Cardell Jones was the previous one, so I like going Jarrell Presley. I like in a piece of that offense. They're heavy favorites in there. I think some way or another that they're going to produce. They're just a high-powered offense. I'm a lot of interest there. Now we have 2 spots left, and guys, you have 9K left, right? You can do anything. You could plug in the highest price guy here, get a middle guy for around 7K. You could plug in 2 guys around 9K. There's tons of different options there. So we'll clear there. I'll go over one more. Another guy that I like a good amount. I talked about him. Landry Jones. Let's kind of go look at those weapons over here. I think a lot of people are going to look at Jazz Ferguson. He is a little banged up. He's questionable. He's actually listed at number 2 on the depth chart. He's actually probably the 3rd guy I like the most out of the 3 starters, which is Jeff Badgett at number 1, Jazz Ferguson number 2, and Flynn Nagel playing the slot. I like Badgett a good amount. I like Nagel also a decent amount. I like him because of his price. He's going to play in the slot, and I just think that he's going to be by far the most overlooked. I do think Badett's going to go extremely overlooked because if you just look at the wide receivers around this price, Rashad Ross, a lot of people know him, baller. Mikael McKay, baller. Sammy Coates, baller. Eli Rogers, baller, right? Like all these guys are well-known guys at the top, and then you got Jeff Badgett, where I think a lot of people aren't going to be familiar with him, and I think that's going to give you maybe a little bit of an edge. So I like him, Flynn Nagel there. And don't get me wrong, I still like Jazz Ferguson. I will still have some shares of Jazz Ferguson if I'm playing Landry Jones in multiple lineups, but for this sake, it's going a little bit undone. So we'll go there. And then running back, we already kind of talked about the running backs. I think that Elijah Hood has some potential. I'm a little bit worried that if Josh Johnson doesn't play, that he could actually get game scripted out because where is he here? Not Dwan Harris. Dwan Harris is actually listed as number 2 on the depth chart. He played a little bit for the Packers, but I'm not too interested there. He's older guy. But Larry Rose, he's a pass-catching He's a pass-catching running back. I want to say that he averaged about 4.5 receptions in his senior season, and he had around 45 yards per game. So he is a guy that I think if they get down, he could get in there. And so I think he has a little bit of interest as well. But really, so I'll leave this kind of blank. I'll let you kind of fill in that. As far as here, I mean, I like going Mikhail McKay. And then you can just look at so many of these kind of like cheaper wide receivers, right? Because like, I mean, there's so many. Like look at, I think, Tampa Bay. I'm going to go click on a couple. I already got Dallas guys. I'm going to click on just a couple. Really like a lot of receivers from these three teams here. Tampa Bay, we haven't really talked about. Aaron Murray played at Georgia for 4 years. So you guys might be familiar with him. But I like him because I'm a big fan of Mark Trestman. Mark Trestman, he's a pioneer here in this game, in the offensive genius in the CFL. He won Coach of the Year awards, multiple championship awards before going to the Bears. He actually had a pretty decent stint with the Bears. I believe they were like 8th in yards that first season. And then like 9th or 8th in attempts, or 5th in attempts, the following season. So it is an offense that I am going to want to attack. His wide receivers, his quarterbacks came in first and second in pass attempts in the CFL his last 2 seasons there. So I'm going to have interest in that team specifically. And I guess if we just kind of look at those wide receivers who they have, Satavius Jones, he's actually listed on like 4th on the depth chart. Antonio Callaway would have been a stud coming from Cleveland. We all know about his outside or off the field concerns, and he has injury concerns. Nick Truesdale was actually, I think, the first pick for them, so that's interesting. He is going to be a red zone threat. But if you look at their wide receivers, so on their depth chart, guys, they have Reese Horn, Jalen Tolliver, and Dan Williams. There's their number 3 wide receivers. They are 3.4K, 3.2K, and 3K, right? For a team that's going to throw 60 times a game, 50 times a game, guys, he says it's 3K. Someone's going to get targeted 8 to 10 times, guys. It's going to happen. I'm going to have interest here. I think all 3 of those guys are playable. But guys, that kind of is. We're running a little long here. I didn't anticipate it going this long. I hope you guys find this useful. Like I said, guys, if you're interested in the game-by-game breakdown, if you're interested in more data, just go to my Patreon, patreon.com, patreon.com/MysticMac. DFS, MISTICMAC, I appreciate you guys. If not, please subscribe, like. I'll be having more stuff out throughout the week. Maybe do a review, see how this went, see if we have egg on our face, see what happens. And I will be back next week. I appreciate you guys. Hope you guys crush it. Bye.